Okay, let's get started. We are on Daf Samech Gimel Amud Aleph at the two dots on the fifth line. And really, everything that we're seeing so far in the fourth parak has to do with the principle that when you sell real estate, you have to be very specific in your verbiage. And sometimes changes in language, even small changes in language, can make a difference in the meaning as to what you meant to sell and what you meant to retain ownership of. The premise that we're working with is that if a person sells a house, there are certain things that go along with the sale of the house, and there are certain things that do not go along with the sale of the house. For example, if you have a rooftop on that house that has a parapet, it's got an enclosure, so that's considered to be a separate domain, and therefore it's not included in the sale of the house. But, as we're going to see in today's Gemara, there's something that the Rishonim call Yitor Lashon, which means that if you add extra verbiage in the stipulation of the sale, let's say in the contract and the way that you sell the property, the wording that you use, by adding extraneous words, you are implying that you're giving more to the buyer. And so that's why words are going to make the way that you stipulate the terms of the sale are going to make a difference. So let's take a look. Pshita, Amar Yachluk Ploni Benichsai Palga. So the first thing the Gemara is going to discuss is a Shchiv Meira, a man on his deathbed, who's giving away gifts before he dies. If he says, give Ploni half of my estate, or he says, give Ploni will divide my estate. So that clearly means that he wants Ploni to get half of his estate. Okay? Tenu chelek le Ploni benichsai man. But what if he says, give Ploni a portion of my estate? He doesn't say that he'll divide, which by definition means cut it in half. But he says, give him a portion. So how much is a portion? So Amar Ravina Bar Kisi Tashma. So he says, come and listen. And we're going to try and prove the issue from a brisa. Now what this brisa is going to try and prove is that when a person says give a portion, it could mean up to a half. But we don't know how much. It could be a quarter, it could be an eighth. And what that's called is mamon hamutal b'safek. Essentially, you have a doubt as to how much this guy is entitled to. And we're going to see the opinion of Sumchus, who has said in Bava Basra, Bava Basra, many places, Maman hamutal b'safek cholkin. Anytime you don't have a muchzak, no one's holding on to there's no indication through possession of who's the owner, and you don't know who should get it, you simply divide it among the two parties. So let's see what the brisa says. Ha'omer tnu chelek l'ploni bebor. If a person says, I own this well, and I'd like Ploni to have a portion of it. So what does he mean by portion? So Sumchus Omer, Ein Pachos Meravia. So Sumchus says, quite consistently, Maman Hamutal B'Safek Cholkin. When a guy says give him a portion, he means no less than half. That's the implication of a portion. It could mean up to a half, but it could mean also an eighth or a quarter. We don't know how much it is. So therefore, we take that half that's in question. It could be a half, it could be less. And that item in question is we cut that in half. So basically, we give the guy a quarter of the well. That's essentially how much ownership he's going to have of that well. Because that, we don't know how much a chelik is, but it could mean up to a half. It could be anywhere from 0 or 0.1 to a half. And therefore, we give him a half of that amount that is in question, which is a quarter. Now, what if a guy says, give my friend a portion of the bor lechavis for his barrel? The Rashbam, and I'm not sure how the Rashbam knows this, but the Rashbam says when a person says lechavis, it means I want him to have enough water to feed his animals in their trough, but not enough to fully irrigate his fields, just enough to feed his animals. So what does that mean? So ein pachos mishminis likid mishminis. Then what he means to say is how much a typical well you'd be able to fill up multiple chavuyos in a typical well The Rashbam says a barrel would typically take up about a quarter's worth of well water from a well. And again, I have no idea how he knows this. But he says, let's assume that that's what he means. If that's the case, if he says give him a portion of a well, so then what he means is ein pachos mishminas. So we don't if a barrel is a let me just see. He says like this. Klomer imamar tnu chelak leploni bebor lechavis kedei lamalos chavis dainu lashkos behemosav. He says, I'm sorry. He says a half of a bore is a chavis worth. A barrel would take up a half of a well. If you wanted to fill up a full barrel, that would take up half of the well water. And so therefore, we don't know, he wants him to have a portion which could be up to a half of the chavis, which would be up to a quarter of the well water, should belong to him. Mm-hmm. So how much is he entitled to as far as ownership of this well? Half of that quarter, which would be an eighth. Okay? What if he says likadera? What if he says, I want my friend to have ownership of the bore to be able to fill up a pot, which means I don't want him to have enough water to irrigate his field. I don't want him to have enough to feed it, to water his animal's trough, but I want him to have enough water that he can cook with. He can cook his own dinner with. So a kedera is ein pachos miyud beis. So like the Rashbam consistently would say, a kedera typically would fill up a third of the well. And if it's going to fill up a third of the well, so then he wants his friend to have up to a half of that third, which would be a sixth. And since we don't know how much of that sixth he wants him to have, cut it in half and give him a 12th. Okay? That's ein pachos miyud beis. And litafiach ein pachos mishisha asar. And if he says give him a canteen's worth of that well, so how much is a canteen? So he says a canteen would fill up a quarter of the well. And again, I don't know again how we get these calculations, but a canteen is only for his personal drinking water. So then, if he wants him to have a portion of the canteen, that's up to a half of the canteen, which would be an eighth of the well. And since we don't know how much of that eighth he wants him to have, cut that eighth in half to make it 1/16. Essentially, what we're proving from this brisa is that when you don't know how much a person is supposed to have, just take the most that is meant from that statement and cut it in half and give that to him. So therefore, if a guy says, give a chelak of my assets to Ploni, the most he means is a half. Cut that in half and give him a quarter. That's the answer. Now another subject. Tonu Rabban. The Brisa now says, Ben Levi shemachar soda li Yisrael. V'omer lo al menashe ma'aser rishon shali, ma'aser rishon shalo. You have a guy who's selling a field. The guy happens to be a Levi. Normally, what do we know about a Levi? People give him ma'aser rishon. People give him 10% of their annual yield of their produce. The Levi says to himself, listen, I'm going to sell this guy a field that can produce harvest. Let me make a deal with him. It's no skin off of his nose, practically speaking, because he can give the ma'aser to whomever he wishes. I'll make a deal with him. That I'm selling you this field on the condition, with the understanding that every year you're going to give me the ma'aser instead of giving it to some other Levi. So the Brisa says that that's a legal transaction, and every single year the buyer must give the seller Levi a 10% of the 10% ma'aser of his field. V'im omar li v'livnai meis yitain levana. And if he further stipulates, I want you to give to not only to me, but if I die, I want you to give it over to my children also, then, and the buyer agrees, then the buyer's legally bound to that. You see, if he didn't say that, the buyer would only be bound to give it to the seller Levi as long as the seller Levi is alive. Once he dies, the deal is over. But now that he's added that additional stipulation, he's got to give it to the children as well. V'im amar lo kol zman shahasad zu biyadcha machra b'chaz v'lakcha ein lo alav klum. And if he further stipulates and he says, you have to give me the ma'aser for as long as the field is in your possession. In other words, it's not just for 1 year's harvest, but it's for every single year that you own the field. Then the most that the Levi seller can demand from the buyer is as long as the buyer owns the field. So let's say the buyer wants to get out of this deal. He has a very simple solution. Let him set up a straw man buyer and say, go to his friend Yankel and say, Yankel, do me a favor. Give me $1, buy the field from me, and I'll buy it right back from you. Right? So then, legally, he's no longer bound by the terms of the deal to the original Levi seller, and he doesn't have to give the annual yield to the Levi seller anymore. So the Gemara now says, Amai. So first of all, we have to understand, how can this be that a seller can stipulate that all 10% of a future yield shall go to me? We know a general principle that a person cannot make a kinyan on something that does not exist in the world yet. And if the crops are not yet grown, how can the two of us, be legally bound to an agreement on something that is not yet here? So the Gemara answers, Kevin Damerle Almanas Shemaiser Rishon Shali, Shiyure Shaire Lamakom Meiser. So the Gemara answers, it's very simple. The seller, Levi, is retaining ownership of something that would normally be included in a sale. But he's retaining ownership of the real estate itself. Normally when I sell you real estate, I sell you the entire kit and caboodle. You get everything. But in this particular transaction, I'm retaining a small ownership right within the soil itself that normally would not be given over, that normally would be totally given over to the buyer. And that is, I own that portion in the soil that will be growing those 10% crops that will eventually be tithed for Meiser. So that's why it's not a problem of Davar Shelo Bala Olam, because I'm not making a kinyan on the crops, I'm making a kinyan on the soil itself that will produce the crops, and therefore it's not a problem of Davar Shelo Bala Olam. This is a whole discussion in other sugyas in Shas, that if I sell you a tree, right, or if I sell you a kinyan in a tree, you can be the legal owner of all future fruit that grows from that tree, even though that fruit has not yet grown, because you have a kinyan in the tree itself for its fruit, not in the fruit itself. And therefore, similarly, the owner retains ownership of a portion of the soil that will in the future grow those Meiser crops.
If that's the case, then how can I do the fake sale for $1? Because I'm still owning that 10% or whatever it is.
So that's an interesting question that's undertaken by the Rishonim. The Rashba and the Ritva, someone told me this morning, undertake this question. Uh-huh. Why then, when the buyer sells it, right, just for 5 minutes and then buys it back, is he able to break that kinyan? The answer is because there was no further stipulation. The implication of the sale was only as long as you own it, am I retaining that right in it. But once it's no longer yours, I'm no longer retaining that right. That's the way they explain it. So Amar Reish Lakish. So on this brisa, Reish Lakish comes along and says, Zos Omeris, we can infer from this brisa, just like the Levi seller retains ownership in the soil, so too we can infer from this and extrapolate to another case. Amocher bayis lechaveru, va'amar lo almanash dyuto helyona shali, dyuto helyona shalo. That if a person sells a house and he says, I'm selling you this house on the condition that I retain ownership of the rooftop enclosure, he retains ownership of the rooftop enclosure. Now, so the Gemara says, L'mai hilchasa. The Gemara asks a very simple question. Even if you hadn't said that statement, what did the Mishnah tell us? The Mishnah had said that when you sell a house, you automatically retain ownership of the rooftop structure, as long as it has a parapet around it. So why do you even need to say this statement? So the answer is, you must be, because of your additional verbiage, we interpret, just like in the brisa, because you said that you want to get the future Meiser, we interpret what the seller means is, even though he didn't say it explicitly, but because no one says something nonsensical, we interpret what he's meaning to say is, I'm retaining an ownership within the soil itself. So we retranslate his words to make it purposeful and meaningful. So too here, we're going to have to retranslate his words, because if he hadn't said these words at all, he would already retain ownership of the parapet. So what is he coming to add? And therefore, we have to interpret like this. Rav Zvid Omar, she'im rotza lahotzi bazizin motzi. Rav Zvid says, normally when I sell a property, even when I retain ownership of the rooftop structure, but what did I sell? I sold the house, and I sold the yard around the house. Normally, when I sell a house with the yard around the house, I sell all air rights above the yard also. So Rav Zvid says, why did the guy say, I'm dafka retaining ownership of the rooftop property? Because he means to say that not only am I going to have the rooftop, but I'm going to have the air rights that surround the rooftop that normally I would be giving to you, and I'm going to reserve those rights so that if I want to put up horizontal beams that are sticking out of my rooftop, I have a right to do that. Let's say I want to...
you build on top of it another...
We're going to get there in a second. But before then, he's retaining ownership of the air rights that he would normally be selling. Okay? So that's what he's retaining ownership of, and we reinterpret what he's saying is that he wants to retain something that he normally wouldn't be retentive of. He would not normally retain the air rights of the surrounding yard, but he's saying, so then, in other words, he had to mean something. So what did he mean? He means to say, I'm retaining rights of the air rights that I normally would be giving away. Rav Papa Amar Shim Ratza Livnos Aliyah Al Gaba Boina. And Rav Papa says, no, that's not what it means. What it means is that if he wants to build on top of that rooftop structure and he wants to add to it in some way, then he has every right to do so. Now we're going to see the Gemara is going to reinterpret Rav Papa later on, but this is the simple explanation. So the Gemara now says, Bishlam Rav Zvid Hainu Dikatani Zoso Meres. Elo Rav Papa my Zoso Meres. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. According to Rav Zvid, it makes very good sense why Reish Lakish is making an inference from the Brisa. That basically, what are we saying? That just like in the Brisa, we have to reinterpret your words to say that you're retaining something that you would normally giving away to the buyer as far as ownership within the real estate itself that you normally would not be retaining. Then I understand, according to Rav Zvid, when I sell you a property with a surrounding yard, I'm normally selling you everything in the house, including the air rights above the yard. But I'm retaining, we interpret your words to say that I'm retaining ownership not only of the rooftop property, which I would, without saying anything, but also the air rights above the yard that are parallel to the rooftop. So it makes sense why it's a correct inference from the Brisa. Because normally I would be giving away the entire property, including Meiser, the soil of the Meiser. But here, by adding those words, reinterpret it to mean that I'm retaining ownership as the seller of a portion of the soil that produces the Meiser. Fine. But according to Rav Zvid, what is Rav Zvid? But according to Rav Papa, I appreciate the fact that by adding those words, you're retaining additional rights that you might not have normally had. But you're not retaining a portion of the real estate that you normally wouldn't have had. Okay, fine. Perhaps if you hadn't said those words, you would not have a right to add on to the structure on the rooftop, because maybe you'd have to get permission from the owner of the house before you add on to the structure. Mela, I understand that. But how is that being inferred from the Brisa? The Brisa is talking about retaining a kinyan in the real estate that is normally given over to the buyer. That's not the case according to Rav Papa. I'm not taking something that I normally would give to you. In the case of the Brisa, I'm retaining ownership of a portion of the soil for Meiser that would normally be yours. According to Rav Zvid, I'm retaining airspace that I would normally give to you. But according to Rav Papa, it's a right. It's not I'm not maintaining or retaining a chelik in the real estate. I'm just asking for a right to build onto the rooftop that I normally would have to ask permission for. So there's no additional retention of real estate in the illustration of Rav Papa. So why are you inferring it from the Brisa? Just say it as an independent statement. So the Gemara says, you're right, kasha. That's a kasha on Rav Papa. Let's go on. Amar Rav Dimi Minahar Da. And we'll see, we're going to come back to Rav Zvid and Rav Papa in just a moment. Rav Dimi Minahardah says, Haiman demazbin lebeso lechavre. And remember, this whole idea of yitur lashon, of adding to the language, makes a difference. If a person sells a property to his friend, afal gav de kosav le kavaruma, tzarach lemichtav le keniloch mitahom ara ve'ad rum rakia. He says, even, and by the way, there's a big machlokas here between Rashbam and Tosfos, but I'm going to learn like Tosfos today for simplicity's sake, and also because Rabbeinu Gershom agrees with Tosfos. Okay? So just see how small Tosfos is, see how small Rabbeinu Gershom is, right? It's a lot easier sometimes to learn like that. So we're going to go like that because it's much more straightforward. When a person sells a house, if he doesn't say anything, just I'm selling you the house, then the way that Rav Dimi is presenting it is that a person has no air rights above the house and he has no land rights below the house. He can't dig underneath the house. In other words, the land rights, you know where land rights are really big? In Beverly Hills, California. Because you know why? Because of oil. And because
Jed
of oil.
Clampett.
What?
Jed Clampett.
Jed Clampett, right.
Struck oil.
Black oil, Texas tea.
Ziggy.
Anyway, so I know when I was growing up, the reason why Beverly Hills property was more valuable is because when you purchased a house, you automatically owned the oil rights underneath the house. When you purchased a property in LA, in other words, Beverly Hills is a separate municipality. In LA, you don't have the oil rights, but in Beverly Hills, when you own the house, you own the oil rights, and therefore any oil that is pumped out of the land and underneath your house, the oil company has to write you a check. So sometimes it would be like you'd get $50 a month or whatever it was, but it was something, you know? So you don't have any rights for above the airspace above the house, and you don't have any rights below the house for digging, okay, at all. If a person says, I'm selling you the house plus veruma, which means the depths and the heights, then you're giving the person airspace above the house, and you're giving the person digging rights below the house with limitations. Comes along Rav Dimi and says, if you want to give him unlimited rights above the house and below the house, you have to say not only veruma, which means depths and heights, but you have to say umka ad tahom, depths down to the tahom, down to the very depths of the center of the earth, and ruma, the heights, up until outer space. Why do you have to do that? Because if you didn't say that, then the person would not have the rights to the subterraneous water. Here they're not talking about oil, they're talking about water, which in the ancient world is the valuable thing, right? You don't have any water rights. If you dig deep enough, you'll eventually hit a vein of water. If you just say veruma, the guy has no rights to subterraneous caverns of water underneath. And if you just say veruma, he has rooftop rights, but he does not have rights to a rooftop property that has a parapet around it. He only has rights to the rooftop if it is unparapeted. But if it's parapeted, if it has a ma'akeh, that's considered to be a separate domain. So therefore, you'd have to say veruma ad rakia until the outer space, because that explicit additional language gives him even the separate domain of the parapeted property. That's what Rav Dimi maintains. And the Gemara says, my taima, du veruma bistama lokani. He says, when you sell it, and this is what the Gemara is speaking out, when you sell a person a property without saying anything, just the house is yours, the guy has no underground rights and he has no above roof rights whatsoever. Ahani veruma lemikne veruma. So by adding the words umka and ruma in the contract, you're giving him digging rights and you're giving him rooftop rights. But va'ahani mitahom ara va'ad rum rakia lemikna bor v'dus mechilos. But when you add unto the depths and unto outer space, down to the tahom and up to the rakia, you're not only adding digging rights and rooftop rights, but you're adding digging rights to get to use the water rights beneath the house, plus you're adding the parapeted property that's above the house. So lema misayele. Let us suggest that tomorrow's Mishnah is a support to Rav Dimi, because it says, velo es habor, velo es hadus, afal pi shekasav lo veruma. That it says explicitly in the Mishnah that when you sell a house, the buyer does not have the water rights below the house, unless, and that's true even if you write explicitly kavaruma in the contract. So you see that writing kavaruma alone does not give you water rights below the property. So the isal kadaitach b'stama kani kavaruma, lihani kavaruma lamikni borvadusa mechilas. And if you're going to argue that if you hadn't written anything, the guy would have digging rights and above roof rights, then the extra language of kavaruma being added explicitly should give him the rights to the water underneath the house. And the fact that it doesn't shows that Rav Dimi is correct, that when you sell a house without stating anything, you get nothing but the house. When you add kavaruma, you get just basic digging rights and rooftop rights. And when you add ad tahom and ad rakia, only then does the guy get water rights under the house and the parapeted property above the house. The Gemara says lo tzricha, the lo kasav le. So the Gemara says no. Maybe the Mishnah is saying that you don't have water rights underneath the house because you didn't write kavaruma. But maybe if you wrote kavaruma explicitly, that alone, not like Rav Dimi says, would give you water rights. But wait a minute, how could you say that? But the Mishnah explicitly says that even though you wrote it, kavaruma, the guy still doesn't have water rights. So that doesn't that prove Rav Dimi? No. It means like this, Hachikamer, Afal Pisha lo kasav lo kemisha kasav dami, lemikna kavaruma. Maybe the way you could read the Mishnah, possibly, not as a raya to Rav Dimi, but you could read it this way, that even if you sell a guy a house without stipulating anything additional, just the house is yours, then that's as if you wrote kavaruma, and therefore he has digging rights without stating anything. But lemikna bor v'dusu mechilos ikasav le kavaruma kani v'ilokasav lo kani. And maybe the way it works is not like Rav Dimi said. Maybe according to the Mishnah, without writing anything, the guy automatically has digging and rooftop rights. And if you write kavaruma, he has water rights and he has parapet rights. And maybe that's the way you learn the Mishnah. Not like Rav Dimi says that you got to say tahom and rakia, right? So tashma. But let's look at another proof from the Mishnaic text. Let's look at our Mishnah, the one that we learned a couple days ago. V'lo es hagag bizman sheyesh lo makeh gavoa asar tvachim. That when you sell a house stam, the buyer does not have rights to the rooftop property, as long as it has a parapet. The isal kadaitach b'stamakani kavaruma ki gavoa asar tvachim my hobby. And if you're going to tell me that without saying anything, it's implicit that the guy has digging rights and rooftop rights, why then, just because it has a parapet, should he not have those rights also? Why does the seller retain rights to the parapeted property if the guy automatically has kavaruma without saying anything? So the Gemara answers no. Kevin de gavo asar tvachim chashiv. The Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Yes, it could be true, not like Rav Dimi, that whenever you sell a property, automatically it's implicit that he has digging and rooftop rights. But a rooftop with a parapet is considered to be a totally different domain, and that's not included in the sale unless it's explicitly stated. So that's not a kasha, and therefore we have no raya to Rav Dimi, and we don't know. We don't know whether we paskin like Rav Dimi or not, basically, because we don't have any raya yet. Amalei Ravina LeRavashi Toshma. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, come listen to the following. The Amar Reish Lakish Zot Someres Hamocher Bayis Lechaver VaAmar Lo Almanasha Dyuto Halyona Shali Dyuto Halyona Shalo. Remember, Reish Lakish made an inference from the case of the Levi seller, and the inference was that just like the Levi seller retains ownership in the soil, so too if a guy says on the condition that I'm selling you this house on the condition that I retain ownership of the rooftop property, he retains ownership. And of course the question is, he retains ownership even without stating that. So what did he add it for? So, V'amrina l'may hilcha, so that's our question. And we had a machlokus between Rav Zvid and Rav Papa. Rav Zvid Omar Shimrat Salahotzi Bazis and Motzi. Rav Zvid says that he's retaining not only the rooftop property, but also the air rights around the surrounding yard, like we said before. And Rav Papa Omar Shimrat Salivnos Aliyah Al Gaba Boina. And Rav Papa says that he's retaining the rights to build an additional structure on the rooftop. But the question is, V'isal kadaitach b'stama lokani. But if you're going to tell me, like we're asking now a question on Rav Dimi. According to Rav Dimi, when a guy says just, I'm selling you the house, then there's nothing included, not even digging and rooftop rights at all, even without a parapet. So then, lamali almanas. So why then, so Rav Papa doesn't make any sense. Of course, the guy retains rights to build on top of the rooftop. In other words, like, why would I think any differently? Why would it be necessary for him to say explicitly, I'm retaining the rights of the diuta, if in order to give him the rights of building? If when I sell you stam a house, I'm automatically retaining all rights of the rooftop, then I'm not gaining anything by the way Rav Papa understands it, by stating that I want to retain ownership of the rooftop. I already have all rights of the rooftop to continue building on it. So what else am I asking for? So that's a kasha on Rav Dimi. So the Gemara answers, Ahani le almanas the inafil hadar bani la. The Gemara answers like this. Really, Rav Dimi, we could defend against this. Because what Rav Dimi means, the way Rav Dimi would explain Rav Papa is as follows. Really, when you say, I'm selling you a house and you don't say anything else, the seller retains ownership of the entire rooftop, even if it's not roofed, even if it's not parapeted, which means he's got complete rights on that rooftop, right? Such that if he wants to build upon it, he can build upon it. So then what's the purpose of saying, Almanas shahadyuta elyona shali? What's the point of saying that I get to keep the rooftop property? What's explicitly added in that? Not that he has, so not like we originally thought Rav Papa was saying, that I have rights to build on it, because that's implicit according to Rabbi. But rather, he's saying that if the rooftop collapses into the house, in which case the owner of the house will have to rebuild the roof, then normally in those situations, I, the seller, would not be able to regain my use of the rooftop because it's a totally different roof that was built by the owner of the house. What I'm stipulating when I make that extra stipulation that I'm selling you the house on the condition that the rooftop belongs to me is that I'm saying that even if the rooftop collapses and you're going to have to rebuild the roof in order to retain ownership of the house, I will be able to reclaim my new use of the rooftop as well. And that's what's added when I make that stipulation. Bottom line is, Rav Dimi is not challenged from this statement of Reish Lakish, but we have no proof to him either, so we don't know how we paskin. That's where we'll hold it for today. Anyone saying Kaddish?
Yeah.